John.
Angie.
What would you say to professional coaches about niching?
Could you be more specific?
That's perfect.
Welcome to the Coaching Clinic with John and Angie, the show for professional coaches that explores the ins and outs of coaching, from working with clients through to running and marketing your coaching business.
If you're a professional coach who's committed to your own personal and professional growth, cares about making a difference, and wants to have a successful coaching business, you're in the right place.
My name's John Ball.
And I'm Angela Bezignano.
Between us, we have over 50 years of coaching experience and best practices to share with you. From getting started to scaling up your business.
We know what works and what doesn't, as well as what it really takes to have a successful and thriving coaching business.
With new episodes every Wednesday.
Make sure you're subscribed to get them fresh. So being that we're going to be talking about niching today, a few points that we want to discuss about it, why it's so important to our businesses, why do it? One of the things that I notice as a coach is that it's really hard to niche. It was almost like getting a root canal for me. I had a really hard time wrapping my head around the idea of niching. It didn't make logical sense to me at the time. I know you're laughing at me, John, but it's my truth.
I'm laughing because I feel very similarly. Niching is hard. It is hard. But it is just all about getting that bit more specific about the problem you're going to solve and who you're going to solve it for. And yet it can be really tough. Part of my initial challenge with it was just recognizing that it was probably going to be very helpful to do. And now I know it's really important. We'll talk about why. I recognized it was going to be helpful, but I had all this coaching knowledge and I didn't really have any specialized areas. When you train up as a coach, it's not like training up as a doctor where you're maybe encouraged to go into a specialized area.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have that quite generalist coaching, want to help everyone. You come out with that right sort of attitude of wanting to make a difference and things. However, very hard to get clients if you are out there being a generalist. Just think about it from the perspective of, we've been using a few medical metaphors already, that if you have a medical condition, would you rather go to a specialist or would you rather go to a generalist? If it's a quick checkup, you probably go to a generalist. But if it is something quite specific, you're going to feel much more confident going to a specialist who deals with that and probably pretty much only deals with that and will give you what you need probably a lot more quickly and specifically than a generalist would.
Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy. And it's why we're doing this, right? When you and I started our coaching practices, there really wasn't anybody standing there saying, hey, you should do this, right? This is the way. There's no handbook to this. So I love that we're talking about this. What I want to share is that not all coaches are created equal. We all have different superpowers, if you will, although I don't love to use that phrase. We all have different areas that we really are just great at. And then maybe some areas where we're not. And that's okay. If we think about a fast food restaurant, they start out with one item, right? That's their mainframe and that's what they're known for. If I say Golden Arches, most people are going to think McDonald's, even if you don't eat it, right? Even if it's not your thing. And wouldn't it be great if that's when somebody said, well, leadership coaching or talent development, that if that's your jam, if that's what you do, that you're the person that they would go to for that. And I think the idea behind, but I'm a coach, I can be all things to all people. No. I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes most coaches make when they start a practice. Is thinking that they're going to just be all things to all people. And so I'm kind of beating the dead horse here a little bit, but because once I realized that I needed to focus, just put the blinders on. And that was temporary because guess what? Once I got known, people started asking and the business grew. So how did it work for you?
You ever remember or come across these sort of people selling miracle potions and the like that will cure all your ills and things like that? Sometimes it can feel a bit like that, being a generalist. Well, what could you help with? Anything. I can help you with anything. What about this? What about that? It's like, well, yeah, I can help you with all of it. It just feels a bit too good to be true. And I'm not saying you couldn't as a coach. You possibly could. But we were chatting before we even recorded today a little bit about branding. This comes into it here. What is your brand and who is it speaking to in terms of what you do? Part of your marketing message needs to be speaking very clearly to the audience that you want to connect with. And if you don't have a clear brand, if you don't have a clear problem to solve for people, it's not going to get through, especially with the amount of other messaging that is out there from other people right now. So if you are saying, I could help anyone with everything, who's going to really tune into that message? Whereas if you say, I help people in the tech industry deal with the enormous amounts of stress that they are often under, or people who are in leadership be able to communicate more effectively with their teams and with each other,
Yeah.
you're talking to a much more specific audience. So that's going to prick people's ears up and say, all right, yeah, that's me. I actually have that problem. I recognize that. I should maybe check out a bit more about this and find out what it would be like working with this person. Some of my coaching now is more in the realms of helping people with their performance as a speaker and as someone who's delivering content and information, whether that's in podcasts, online, or in person. Then that's pretty much what you're going to get with me. We're going to work on your presence. We're going to work on your charisma. We're going to work on the things that help you to be better at getting your information
Sure.
across. How about you, Angie? Like, when you did make that decision to niche, what happened for you and what difference did it make?
Oh, well, again, I resisted it. I was very anti because I had had some experience, right? I just had a little bit of experience and it felt really good. And finally, the light bulb went off because I knew I had a great product, but there was something in my head saying, this doesn't feel right. Like I should be doing so much more. And then actually, this was funny how this happened. I had a conversation with somebody and his name was John and he was a business coach. I met him at an event. We just got to talking and he said, well, so what do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm a coach. And he was like, really? So what's your focus? And I was like, oh, I do it all. And he looked at me. I'll never forget the look on his face, like, really? You do everything? So this is what he said to me. And I guess he was trying to pitch me. And I did end up working with him and he changed everything. But he said, so if I am a career coach, is what he said, if I'm looking for somebody to come do some career coaching, I'm going to hire you. And you're also going to talk to me about my relationships at home. And the way he presented it, I remember thinking somebody just splashed ice cold water on me because I was unable to articulate what I did. And then I thought, oh, geez, if I don't know what I do, how in the world is anybody else going to know? How can I sell myself, my brand, my intellectual property, if I don't know who to send it to?
Mm.
So I did end up hiring him and he made a huge difference. What was the outcome? The outcome was that the phone was ringing. That
Right.
was what was happening. It wasn't
Yeah.
me grinding and grinding and grinding and getting very little return for my investment of time, energy, money. All of a sudden the phone rang and then the phone rang and he was like, wow, look at this. It's like, who knew? Who knew? That all we had to do was say, and at the time, my focus was all levels of sales training.
Right.
And once I learned how to sell myself, then I had this extra piece and this extra value to bring to the people that I was coaching. So
Yeah.
it was a pretty funny moment. I actually wish somebody had a picture of the look on my face when, when John asked me, so what do you do? And I was all like, oh, and all my energy and the arms were flailing like I was excited. And he was like, ew. Like, he really was like,
But I
so
can
wait,
just,
I'm going to,
yeah, I can just well imagine that there's going to be at least one person listening to this thinking, yeah, I don't know how I would answer that question either. And I
no.
can certainly, it's an important question to be able to answer. This is why this matters so much. I can remember thinking how unfair it was when I was starting off as a coach. I was very big on fairness, that some coaches who were really excellent coaches didn't seem to be very successful. And some of them weren't even able to stay in coaching long term. Some of them gone within several years. So it's just the reality of the business. And I felt like some people who weren't very good coaches somehow were sticking around and raking it in. And I felt that it was really more to do with who was better at marketing And to some degree, that's true. And I think, oh,
Interesting.
wouldn't it be a beautiful world if the people who were really good at coaching were also really good at marketing? But I don't think you can be good at marketing your coaching unless you niche down to who you're going to help and have that niche that's, as they say, an inch wide and a mile deep. Is get as specific as you can without being too restrictive about who you can help and how, so that you can
Yeah.
actually get out there and solve a problem. Solve a problem for people who can afford to pay you for solving it. That's another thing I see coaches go wrong with on this. If people you want to help can't pay for your services, you are not going to have a business. And we are talking about having a business at the end, not a charity that means you end up just as broke as your clients. So we really must consider these things, right?
Well, there definitely needs to be a business structure. I think most people come into coaching and have some type of a passion toward it. I don't think coaching, if you're a great coach, is something that can necessarily be taught, although there are best practices and all of that.
Yeah.
That's a later podcast. But I do think that if you're clear on yourself, your message, and your mission as a coach, and you're able to then articulate that, you are creating a business. There's two sides to it. There's that passion piece, and then there's that, what does my business structure look like? And I did that. I was the coach that, if my fee at the time was $125 an hour, and somebody came to me and said, "Oh, I can only do it for 65." I did it because I needed to keep the lights on and the food in my belly. But I realized that was really unfair. How do I then have the nerve to charge somebody else my fee, whatever your regular fee is, right? How do you,
Mhm.
but then discount it or reduce it, if you will, for somebody else? So that created a little bit of a quandary for me, because then I didn't
Yeah.
feel like I was being into the people who could.
I think that's an important thing to consider, and certainly we'll discuss that in another episode. I
Yeah,
feel that
we definitely will.
there is a place for generalist coaching. There is, and there's even a demand for it right now with some of the coaching companies that have sprung up. They want generalist coaches to come in. But even then, you still have to compete for clients within that company. You still have to have a profile that's going to attract people towards you. So if you don't have specific problems that you're helping with, you may be able to go a little more generally, but you still can't go and help anyone with everything. You still need to get a bit more specific. Do you prefer working with people on business? Do you prefer to work with them on relationships? Do you prefer to work with them? Oh gosh, what
Mhm.
other areas do people get coached for these days? But pick your areas that you actually enjoy and can help people by working with, even in those sectors. But also consider you are always going to be somewhat limited in what you can earn as a coach in those sectors. You're going to have an hourly rate. You don't get to set that for yourself. You can go to some of the increases within that. But it's only by specializing and perhaps even then starting to offer your own services that you start to get much more into the sort of elite levels, when you know that there are coaches earning $1 million and more a month, making those kinds of sales. That's out there. That is realistic, but only if you get clarity on your message and who you're helping and how, and start working towards that. And this is stuff we're going to cover in a lot more detail in more sessions in the future. But I think it's important to just have that distinction of, yes, there is still some need for a generalism in coaching, but it's also going to restrict you. It might help you be a springboard to where you do want to go, at least at the
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah.
So don't think we're just crapping all over the idea of being a generalist, but how much more you can grow and develop and make and be successful as a coach by being more specific about who you help and how.
I think too, so once we get the idea across that niching is so important, once that reconciliation happens mentally and we go, okay, I think the next big question becomes, well, then how do I know? How do I know what I'm supposed to be doing? And I answer that most times for people, like, it's multi-pronged answer. Where do you feel passionate? Right? Like, we're really, like, we don't necessarily want to drag you away from what it is that made you decide to get into coaching. The other piece I think that's important is, most people don't come into the world at the age of 18 or 17 and they graduate high school and say, I want to be a coach. most coaches, so everybody hear me, don't come at me. Most coaches come from some other industry and
Yeah.
they have experience in that industry. And that's probably what prompted them to do something different. And I always say, start with what you know, right? Because it's not that we need the validation, but we can better relate to people that are maybe in that arena. So,
Yeah.
multitudes of my own clients have left super high level, high paying corporate jobs because of a varying of reasons.
Okay.
And they've taken bits and pieces and said, I'm going to train people on how to do this, or I'm going to coach people on how to do this or not do this. So there is a natural segue. And I think that it's really up to the individual to decide. And it may take a minute to decide, but that doesn't mean let me just go back to doing everything because I don't know the answer yet. Give
Yeah.
yourself a minute to really think about what impact you want to have and how you're best able to do that.
I wonder if there are people listening to this who are asking themselves, how do I do this? And I think you do have to think about things like, do I fit with the industry that I'm looking at? Because it's not just about where there's the most money, right? Like, you might be an ideal person for working in corporate. And I think that's one of the reasons why it helps so much to come into coaching from having the experience before. I don't think it's generally a good idea to be very green and just out of uni or whatever and becoming a coach right away. And it's going to be very challenging. It's very hard to get the respect as a young coach. I certainly found that in my earlier days of coaching. Like, I was in my mid to late 20s when I first started coaching, and it was very hard to get
That long
respect, especially,
ago.
yeah, it's long ago. It was very
Sorry,
hard to
so
get respect from those. Thank you, Angie. Very hard to get respect from those older clients. And I really felt like I had to earn my colors, but also I did have to at some point recognize there was a lot I didn't know. There was a lot that I was quite naive about, and that does come along with age. But the professional experience I did have was actually a really good grounding. My background had mostly been in customer service. It made sense for me to focus a lot of my coaching work around either
yeah,
towards the industry that I'd worked in or towards coaching around particularly customer service issues and the likes.
that's it.
But if you have a sales background, great, there's loads of opportunity in sales. If you don't have a particular industry background, but you're very spiritual, or people come to you for advice about their relationships and stuff, these could all be good indicators that this could be a good place for you to focus. But just think this is going to be something you're going to be doing regularly. This is what my coaching mentor says. You do not have to marry your niche. You only need to date them. You're not locking yourself into anything. You can just date this for a while, see if it works for you. And if it doesn't, you can select another niche and focus on a different area. I've done it. I've worked in several different niches of coaching. How about you?
Absolutely. For me, my business grew organically. So even though I finally saw the light and started focusing on sales, then I started to expand my offering, right? That was the thing. The only space that I don't speak into right now is like nutrition or
Mhm.
exercise. I have no pretty initials at the end of my last name that say I'm certified to even talk about any of that. So I use myself as a resource. I've aligned myself with people that can be an extension and a reference and say, hey, I've worked with this person. I recommend them. But in terms of how my business grew, there were places that I did, like I started in sales and then it went into leadership and all these things. It just grew. And I started to recognize what I really loved and what lit me up and what drained me, because being a coach, it can be really draining work.
Yeah,
We'll talk about that at a later time as well.
we definitely
But
need to. Yeah,
yeah,
big
and we
issue.
definitely need to, because you don't want to be, if you finish your workday like you've been on the treadmill at full power for 8 hours, then something's wrong. And we may not know what that is yet, but anyway, so for me, it changed and it grew organically. And then what I decided was, you know what, no treadmill for me. If I want treadmill, I'll go back into corporate. No, thank you.
Yeah,
So, I stick now with what lights me up. And honestly, what I feel like I'm worth. And I think one of the things I want to point out is that if this is just a best practice mindset thing, just because it doesn't work with one niche doesn't mean it can't. Because I think a lot of people go, oh, that's it. I tried. It didn't work. I'm a failure. It didn't work. Let me go back and get a job. That's not always the case. Sometimes You just need to pivot and twist and shift a little bit to find that interlocking piece to make that puzzle piece fit. So you may not know it right out of the gate if you're brand new.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, right? And sometimes the puzzle pieces come along. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I feel like we've probably covered pretty
Yeah.
much everything I would want to cover about niching, and
Yep.
hopefully our listener gets why this is important, and why we should definitely be thinking about this, talking about it, and working towards it as best you can right now from whatever position you're in. It's going to make a huge difference to your success and your ability to create a successful business and stay in business as a coach. But any final words or thoughts around niching, Angie?
Just, I think one small reiteration is to give it a minute, lead with your heart, right? The money usually will follow. And if it doesn't work initially, don't run away. That's just let it ride for a minute.
I think that's a great thought to end our episode on. We'll be back very soon with another episode of the Coaching Clinic. So we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye for now.